new goal this year, you guys have to help me on this. I'm going to try to wrap up my thoughts by 1:20. So I'm aiming this journey for 15-minute classes with 10 minutes of question and discussion if there are additional comments or questions. The reason is because the night session is going to be followed at 6:30 by Spanish Bible study. It's a tighter window, so this is my practice round to make sure I finish it in time. And then I'm teaching after that class for the Spanish religious ed teachers. So time is becoming more critical until our building is completed. So please keep that in prayer. With that, yes?
Are you planning on moving around?
Yeah, no.
Okay.
I tried to download an app for laser pointer. Oh my God, I tried 3 different ones. They're all simulated. I'm thinking, what good is a simulated? It's like with a cartoon dog or something. That's not useful. So I'll just point to it here. I don't expect anyone in the back to be able to see this. If you've never been to one of my classes before, I like to say this whiteboard is for my benefit, not yours. Keep me on track. But the best thing to do if you want to take the notes is just with your phone, come up and take a picture of it. And after class, that's a fast way. Then you can focus more on listening rather than writing. But those are just some main points I want to bring out. So.
I'll put a picture in the comments if
Okay,
you're watching on
for
Facebook.
those watching on Facebook, we'll try to link a picture for you. Okay. With that, we just pray in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, we're reminded recently, as we remember the Saint Jerome, of his words that the ignorance of Scripture is ignorance of Christ. That's part of why we're here. We don't want to be ignorant, and if we are ignorant in any way, we don't want to remain in ignorance. We want to learn more about you. We want to grow closer to you. We want our hearts and our lives to be transformed by the efforts we put in reading your sacred word. So we ask your blessing. We ask especially that you would send your Holy Spirit to guide us during this journey of St. Paul's letters. And we pray all this through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay. Just a couple of quick comments before we give an overview of the letter. And we are, if you haven't heard, we are beginning with Galatians today. Those who've not heard my thinking on this, it's important at least that we be aware of why the books appear as they appear in the Bible. Lacking some other better way of doing it, I guess, the early Christians decided to list the letters of St. Paul according to their length. If I kept my tax records by length of receipts, and I was audited, that's going to be a problem. That is one of the worst possible ways I can think of filing something. But however it came to be, that is how it was determined. So Romans is listed because it's the longest letter, etc. And it goes from that to shorter. If you read them in that way, and most Bible studies do this from cover to cover, you're missing a couple of key things. And I only discovered this by accident. About 15 years ago, I taught St. Paul's letters, and I decided to try this the way. I want to say it's an inspiration of the Holy Spirit. But I never learned them that way in seminary. This was a new attempt for me. But I discovered that you could actually see the growth in St. Paul's life, in his thinking, in his theology. Because he wrote these not over the span of a summer, but as we learned for those who were in Acts of the Apostles, over approximately 30 to 35 years of public ministry. I've only been a priest for 14 years. I've been teaching religious ed for 20 years. I can tell you, my theology has changed in 20 years. I pray it's deepened, that it's richer now because of experiences of my life and further study. But at any rate, over the course of your life, your thinking will likely evolve. That is true of St. Paul, too. His theology gets more developed and nuanced with later letters. So we're starting with the letter we think is right first out of the gate with Galatians, and we're going to take them on in that fashion. So in the handouts, they're listed as best we can guess chronologically. Okay, but I have one little note. Those are my handwritten notes from like 12 years ago. So my notes have also changed in that. A couple of my opinions have changed as well. I'll try to highlight where they're different, or where archaeological discovery has added new information. But that's at least a good, decent blueprint for us, okay? Here's where I want to start, where I like to always start with when we read the letters of St. Paul. It's not to begin anywhere in Paul, but if you have your Bible, and I hope that you bring your Bible every week, if you have it, I would invite you to turn to the second letter of Peter. Second Peter appears in the back before 1 John.
Directly after 1 Peter.
Yeah, it's directly after 1 Peter, and it's after James. And James is after Hebrews. So you're in that ballpark. Everybody there?
Yep.
Okay. So if you turn to 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 15 and 16. This is a reader's warning. I have it written up here, 2 Peter 3, 15, 16. For anybody who studies St. Paul's writing, right out of Peter's mouth, our first hope. This is what he writes in verses 15 through 16. And count the forbearance of our Lord as salvation, so also our beloved Paul wrote to you according to the wisdom given him, speaking of this as he does in all his letters. But here's the warning. There are some things in them hard to understand, which the ignorant and unstable twist to their own destruction as they do the other scriptures. Let us not hope we are unstable or ignorant, but he's warning that many have made shipwrecks of their faith by misreading the writings of St. Paul. They are difficult to understand. Anybody here who's a reader, a lector, that we used to call it at Mass, anybody who reads for Mass, hold up your hand here. For 5. Not as many as I thought, 5. But you all especially can attest when it comes your time to read from the letter of St. Paul at Mass, and you see a text that you thought maybe in your head was a paragraph of 5 to 10 sentences, and then as you're reading, you realize, where's the punctuation here? And I'm realizing this entire paragraph is one sentence. And they've given up long ago in some public schools teaching how to diagram sentences, but I'm the last generation where they still taught it, like in middle school. But you literally, it seems like you have to diagram these paragraphs to understand sometimes what is he saying. And the terminology that he uses has to be defined a bit by his theology and context. So it's easy if you just take a line of Paul's letter out of context to come up with an incorrect conclusion. Case in point, the Protestant Reformation. With all due respect to our brothers and sisters, the Pauline letters have led to some of the confusion of the difference of interpretation. So some of these letters are quite challenging, and I might not even have the answers to all of these for you, but we're going to do our best. So I'm going to start with a bit of an overview. So first of all, that being said, with that warning that these letters are difficult, we turn back now to Galatians. And the Bible I have is actually a study Bible prepared by Scott Hahn, who's a fairly modern scripture scholar and writer. And I'm just going to use the outline of his comments, first of all, just to make a few points. So first of all, who is the author of Galatians? Paul. This is the unanimous opinion of the church. But there are two lines in particular, if you're really a particular kind of scholar that likes to mark this kind of stuff out, where we would point this out to someone who would question it. First of all, the opening sentence, he identifies himself, Paul, an apostle. But more interestingly, there's a line that appears in chapter 6. And just for the record, Galatians is only 6 chapters. So in chapter 6, verse 11, you read this, and this is really on the level of trivia, but it tells about St. Paul's penmanship. It says, "See with what large letters I am writing to you with my own hand." So apparently Paul had big loopy penmanship like John Hancock or something. But he's saying, I wrote it with my own hand, not a secretary, not a disciple of mine. The end. Debate ended, I guess. So, for us anyway, in our Catholic tradition, unanimously we have held he's the author of this. And I would add further in the lower left of the whiteboard, this is a list of all the letters we credit to St. Paul. There are two categories of these letters we normally speak of. One group are called the Catholic letters. They're called Catholic not with a capital C like Roman Catholic, that's not the meaning, but they are Catholic in the sense of the universal church, one pastor, or in this case we recognize him as a bishop, writing to another clergyman, and or someone who is a high representative in the church, so it's an ecclesial matter. The letters we recognize as Catholic letters are 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, Titus, and Philemon. Those are written by St. Paul on ecclesial matters. And the other ones are pastoral letters. So this is, as the word implies, with Paul as their shepherd, as their founding shepherd. He's trying to guide them spiritually along the correct pathway. And those include Romans, 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. I wrote it down in this case in the order they do appear in the Bible, but that makes 9 pastoral letters and 4 Catholic letters, 13 letters total. That's what we're going to study in this little journey, okay? But clearly, he's the author of Galatians. The second thing is, well, I'll try to do these things slightly out of order as they occur to my mind. But who's the audience? So the audience are Jewish converts to Christianity. That's a particular group of people. They're not Gentiles. They're not pagans. They're coming from the Jewish roots, and they've now entered into this Christian covenant. And these are people in that category who live in a region called Galatia. Galatia is a province or like a state of the Roman Empire, like Oregon. And in fact, it's about the size of Oregon, Galatia. It would be almost about 80% of modern day Turkey is where Galatia is today. It was a Roman province established in 25 BC, so only just a few decades before the birth of Christ. But the notes on Scott Hunn's notes, I want to add to them, because he says that the area of Galatia was settled by a group of immigrants from a region called Thrace, which is in northeastern Greece. And these people were called the Gallies. And they moved over there and settled there. That's what he said. And he says that they did this around, what century was that? 3rd century BC. So, several centuries before it was a province of the Roman Empire, they moved there. But in my European travels, I want to add something, and I guess you'll have to pardon me, I do want to step away from the podium just for a second for those watching on Facebook, but just to point out to you my wonderful artistic rendering of Europe. It's 100% accurate, I checked. The coastlines and everything. One of our classmates said it's a picture of a sick moose. But I think if you look closely, you'll see Ireland, England, Portugal, Spain, France, Italy, Greece, Turkey. That's Europe, Scandinavia, the best thing to do. But this is an interesting thing I discovered. So first of all, we know if you go to Ireland and parts of England, the ancient language of the Celtic people is called what? Gaelic. And if you travel to Spain, if you're getting a chance to cover a large area of Spain, you discover that there is a section, a region of Spain in the northwest called Galicia. That's down here. Sorry, I was pointing to France there for a second. Galicia. And we know in the Dark Ages and in parts of the Middle Ages, the area that we think of today as France was called Gaul. That was a name on the Roman map. And these people in Thrace, in Greece, were called the Galli, and now we have Galatia. Do you think there might be a connection between all of this? It turns out there is. This may be a factoid interesting only to me, but the Celtic people were very fierce warriors, and they were sort of prized as mercenary soldiers in the military, especially among the Roman Empire. They wanted these fighters, often for faithful service, for a career of service in the military. If they survived long enough, which the odds weren't very high, most of the soldiers got killed in the battlefield, but if you did survive, they were giving them territory to retire in over in this area in Thrace and in Galatia. They're retired military soldiers, at least the ancestry would be, but it's actually mapping a migration of people from the very western edge of Europe all the way over to Galatia. So today you think of this region, you think of Middle Eastern looking people, the Turkish people, because of the Crusades, because of the rise of Islam. It's kind of more of a Middle Eastern looking culture. That's not the people who were there in the ancient time. I think more like the Irish people living there. So that was the population that was in that area. But as we know from Acts of the Apostles, if you were in that class with me, you know the pattern for St. Paul was to first visit Jewish synagogues and Jewish communities in every place, give them the first crack at the good news, and then anybody who would listen. So when Paul went to these places, he first reached out to the Jewish community, and in this case, that's the principal group that he's addressing this letter to. Okay so far? Okay. I want to add one thing. I don't want to get caught in the minutia, but just to be thorough with these, because when we go through these letters, I kind of want to go deep this time. The last time I taught this, we did one class per letter. It was like turbo speed. So I want to just actually slow down and really explore this text. But the dating of this, I guess it's of slight interest to me. The date for most scholars that they give this letter is either 48 AD or 50 AD. One or the other. And it's based on, I actually wasn't aware of this until I read some of this commentary, but when you read the opening of the letter, it says at the end of the opening address, Paul addresses it to the churches, plural, of Galatia. What does it mean? It actually turns out that there were two general communities of Galatia. There was the area we would just call the southern Galatian community. This was the community that St. Paul established during his first missionary journey, if you can remember back that far. However, on his second journey, he went by land further up into that area, and apparently he established a second Galatian community to the north. And so this dating variation depends on which of those two communities you think this letter is addressed to. I'll read just a little part of Scott Hahn's text here, because I think he sums it up more briefly than I could. He said, dating the composition of the letter is more difficult. The question hinges in part on the identity of Paul's address to the churches of Galatia. If the apostle is writing to the churches of South Galatia that he established in his first missionary journey, then he could have penned the epistle as early as 48 AD. But if Paul addresses the churches in the north, it seems that were founded in the second missionary journey that it was written around 50 AD. These differing dates mean that Paul's visit to Jerusalem, mentioned in Galatians 2, 1 through 10, is the important factor. So I won't go any deeper than that, except if you turn to Galatians 2, chapter 1 through 10, we hear this. Then after 14 years, I went up to Jerusalem with Barnabas, taking Titus along with me. I went up by revelation, and I laid before them, but privately before those who were of repute, the gospel which I preach among the Gentiles, lest somehow I should be running or had run in vain. But even Titus, who was with me, was not compelled. Okay, goes on. So he mentioned Barnabas was with me. I went up to Jerusalem to check to make sure my theology was right. There are two possible times that could have occurred. One is at the beginning of his conversion. If If you recall, back in Acts of the Apostles, he was on the road to Damascus. He kind of got set on fire with faith. He picked a fight with everybody. He had to escape that town by being lowered over the wall in the middle of the night. And he went to Jerusalem after that, because it seemed like a safer place to be. Only he started a whole riot in the city of Jerusalem just a few days later. And the 12 apostles had to tell him, you need to go away for a while. Go to your hometown. Think about something. So that's possibly the place where he presented his theology. The other place would be when Barnabas saw that the faith was really spreading in Antioch, the place we were first called Christians, and his first thought is, I'm going to go get Paul, and he's going to help me work with this community. So it could have been then. Anybody who wants to go deeper than that, look up Scott on his comments. That's about all I want to say, except my opinion is 50 AD. I was convinced by some of the comments that, because he talks about bringing money that he had raised on the fundraising trip, about where this occurred. So I think it's 50. Anyway, that's all I want to say about that. The oldest existing copy of this today is from 200 AD. I think it's in the Vatican Museum. So there's a pretty ancient copy around, but it's a copy of a copy of a copy. The original loopy handwriting of St. Paul, we will never know what it looks like in the flesh, because those copies have all disintegrated with time. The tone of it, I just put this face. There are two clues in here that this is an ancient text, besides the estimated date. This is how biblical scholars date stuff. They try to look for clues in the text. Where were you? What were you doing in these places? How does it line up with Acts of the Apostles? And what we know, which kings were reigning and all that. But the two other real important clues that this is early is, first of all, the main purpose of this letter was he's combating a group of people called Judaizers. And the Judaizers, Paul has come to tell the good news. This group of Judaizers comes after him everywhere he goes. They plague him. And they say, this Paul's not a real apostle. He's a fake apostle. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's not well trained. His thinking is questionable. We come here to clear up any mistakes he might have made. So I'm sure he told you can do away with all your Jewish groups. We're here to correct that. No, you have to be Jewish and Christian simultaneously. You have to keep all your Jewish laws and all your Jewish rituals, and then you can add these new Christian things to them. That's what the Judaizers thought. And this ultimately, this shows it's early, because what is the first crisis of the church that we read about in Acts of the Apostles?
Circumcision.
Well, circumcision more broadly, though, it had to do with transitioning from, if you were a Jew and you want to now become a Christian, how do you do that? They had a council, the first council of the church. The most recent council we had is Vatican II. The very first council from Acts of the Apostles that you can go back and reread is, what do we do with Jewish converts to Christianity versus Gentile converts to Christianity? Because the thought among the Judaizers is, if you're a Gentile, if you're a pagan, you first have to become Jewish. You have to be circumcised, but you also have to keep kosher law. You gotta keep the Saturday Sabbath of the Jews, and then you keep the Sunday Sabbath of the Christians, and then you do all the Christian stuff. And St. Paul said, no, all that Jewish stuff was training wheels for this new covenant, and I say you can break from it. You don't need to keep these rituals anymore. And so the theme of this whole letter is breaking from Judaism. It is the root system of our tree, but we're not bound by those kinds of things anymore. And part of the case he tries to make theologically about this, that I hope will make sense to you, is there are a series of new covenants in the Bible. The first covenant was with Adam, who was essentially considered the high priest of the human race. And every time a covenant ends, it's not going to be broken by God. God is always faithful. But we're like the teenager who has house rules, and then you went to a party and you didn't come home at 10 p.m. like you said you would, you came home at 1 a.m., and now you're grounded. And now the next time I say you can't go to a party, and I thought you did go to a party, and now I find some marijuana in your sock drawer. Now you're really grounded. And now you got a DUI driving your car, and now give me the car keys. And every time the covenant's broken, God, out of love, not out of power trip, he adds more rules to try and teach us our mistakes. But traditionally anyway, every time a new covenant happens, there's three changes. There's a new high priest, like in the covenant of Moses, the high priest was Aaron. Later there was a high priest called Zadok, and later there were different other high priests that took over when new rules were established. There's also new laws. For instance, in the covenant of Adam, when it was broken, once it was broken, in Noah's covenant, the second covenant, additional things were added. So, for instance, Adam and Eve were vegetarian, at least as far as we can tell. But in Noah's time, you could eat meat. Now it's like creation. The animals are participating in this new punishment. They become food to be hunted or harvested. They had to now make sacrifices differently. They were given new liturgical details they had to follow. And, later when that covenant is broken, you have the covenant of Abraham, the practice of circumcision, kosher law and stuff were added. And with each step, the covenant of Moses, they add the Passover meal, the celebration of that. And the covenant of David, they add visiting the temple for various things, because now there's a temple. So there's always going to be a change in the law. Sometimes the law is completely done away with, and whoever the high priest is, it has the authority to do away with it. Sometimes they will keep some things. For instance, Jesus, he told Peter, we no longer need to follow kosher diet. He said, what I've made is not unclean. Take and eat. But for instance, he didn't throw out the 10 Commandments. That's still a thing. He changed the covenant though, from Saturday to Sunday. We have the Mass that we celebrate in the Christian covenant. So there's different rituals that are added or taken away or maintained. There's a different priest, there's a different law. And he's trying to tell these people, Jesus is the new high priest. We're not any longer following the old high priest. And so he has the authority to change stuff. And I'm telling you, when he's changed, we can do away with some of that stuff. Does that make sense? It's important because, for instance, every once in a while, especially these letters have application toward apologetics. If you ever encounter someone who's a Seventh-day Adventist, and please keep in mind if I ever bring up another religious belief in here, I'm not trying to speak with disparity in them. I'm trying to speak respectfully. I believe they love the Lord, but a question you'll always get from a Seventh-day Adventist is, why did you change the Sabbath? The answer is we didn't change the Sabbath. Jesus changed the Sabbath. And he's our high priest. So he has the right to do it. That's the answer. But another good answer is we go to church 7 days a week. So do the other 6 days offend you? I don't know. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's the main theme that he's trying to get at. But here's a second clue that it's very early. The tone. So the big SAT word that Scott Hahn uses is that this is the most polemical letter St. Paul ever wrote. If you don't know what polemical means, I had to look it up to confirm the definition. It just means very hostile. It doesn't have, there's no bedside manner in this. There's no soft pastoral tone. It's angry, in your face, attacking, and it would not fit in our modern PC culture at all. He calls people idiots, stupid people. He says to this group of people who want to continue the practice of circumcision, I say, why don't you just go ahead and cut your genitals off? Just go all the way. Whoa! That's not something you say in a professional setting in modern day. I mean, you would get canceled for sure. If you were today, that would be hate speech. He doesn't care. Because to him, this is a direct attack on the good news he's been sent to convey. So he wants to come out very strongly. In fact, the opening line of this, you feel it instantly. He says, Paul an apostle, not from men, nor through man, but through Jesus Christ. He kind of comes out swinging. No one gave me this job title. I didn't go to seminary, special school. Jesus gave it to me direct. Swing your face. And then he immediately starts with, I'm astonished how quickly you deserted what I gave you. Shame on you. And just kind of punching. I say that's an early indicator because if you, not all of you were able to join me last weekend, but in contrast, I quoted one line that I find very intriguing from 2 Corinthians, which was, I think, written from prison, but anyway, it was written toward the end of his life, so about 3 decades later, where he says, it's when I'm weak that I'm strong. That's not the same guy. He has discovered after 30 years of getting beat up and imprisoned and scourged and beaten with bars and shipwrecked and all this other terrible stuff that God's strength far surpasses his own. If you look at, especially in Acts of the Apostles, you see the personality of St. Paul. Everywhere he goes, his first inclination is, I'm going to find people who oppose me and I'm going to debate them. Because he has supreme confidence in his intellectual ability. He knows he's smart. He knows he's well-schooled. And he believes he can best anybody in a debate. But that's a picture of a guy who is well aware of his own strengths and who's relying on his own strength, I think. And he was good at picking fights. But, you know, he changed. Later in life, he realized, when I'm strong, I'm actually weak because I'm relying on my own limited strength. When I'm weak and I'm relying on God's strength, I'm actually strong because it's not my strength, it's God's strength that's behind me. That takes, I mentioned on Sunday, there are some mysteries that take a lifetime to learn. It's very counterintuitive. It's kind of part of that spirit of the surrender novena to say, would you just get out of God's way and just stop trying to help? You're just getting in the way. You know, I love a couple of those passages from the surrender novena. You're like the guy who goes to the doctor and says, cure me, and then you try to tell the doctor how to do it. Even though he or she went to medical school, you didn't. You are not helping. Or I always think of when my mom taught me how to bake bread, she gave me a little task and she would put her hands on my hand, but I was totally mucking things up. I was slowing down the whole process. I was getting in the way. I felt like I was a big deal, you know, helping her. I was just blockading the whole efficiency of the process. So I think those are signs of change in St. Paul's life. As I say, it's 6 chapters in all. Most scholars, when they look at this, they refer to this as the blueprint of Romans. If you study the Protestant Reformation, Martin Luther, again, I don't want to speak disparagingly of him, he tried it in a confusing time, the best way he could to follow his conscience, and God is the only one who can judge those kind of things in the end. But he did not believe in what we call as Catholics the canon of Scripture. He said there's something beyond that. He called it a super canon. And what he meant by that was, not all the books in the Bible are equal. I think he fed off a little bit on the debate. There's some books, for instance, 2 Peter, I don't think mentions God anywhere in the letter. Some people argue that thing shouldn't be in the Bible. This happened in Jewish times too, the Psalm song. Hey, that's a love letter. It's even slightly pornographic, it seems like. I don't know if that's suitable for sacred scripture. Why is that in the Bible? People would say, Revelation, it's weird. I don't even know what it's about. Why should that be in the Bible? Some people said Hebrews. We don't know who the author is. How can we rely on that as a good book? And James, he quotes from the Old Testament too much. He's not seeming to be relating to the new covenant of Jesus Christ, so maybe that shouldn't be in it. There was a lot of debate around this kind of stuff, and he had a kind of a similar sense to scholars of the past. So his solution to these apparent confusions, our solution, I should say first, what we believe is the correct way is, I always like to say the Bible, the word biblioteca in Spanish means library. It's not a book, it's a library. And we believe the correct way to read the Bible is first, you have to identify the genre of the book. What is this? A poem? History? apocalyptic literature, evangelical writing, a letter, what kind of writing is it? And then we have a different rule of reading depending on what kind of book it is. Martin Luther's idea was the letter of St. Paul to the Romans is the key to the map. It is the most important book. Every tie goes to the letter to Romans. So in evangelical circles, it's why evangelical pastors so often quote from Romans. It's a key book as they view it to interpretation. We don't take that approach. We kind of look more holistically at all the writings of St. Paul and how they fit with other books. But anyway, it's good to be aware of that debate. But it is, however, the blueprint of Romans. It's trying to make the same theological point. It's just that Romans was written about 25 or 30 years later, and it's way more nuanced than developed. So if we can wrap our minds around the point Galatians is trying to make, I think you'll also understand Romans a little bit better. And because of this, and because we think it's the first thing he wrote, the nickname also, one nickname of this letter is it's the Magna Carta of Christianity. It's the first attempt to kind of make a blueprint of the good news in writing. Any questions or comments about that? I think that gave us a good base, I hope, to work from. Does anyone feel more confused than they were a half hour ago? Like driving the car in the wrong direction? Off the cliff? Okay.
I'm not more confused, but
Okay.
when you said, or when he believes that Jesus was the founder of the Sunday.
He's the new high priest of the new covenant.
Okay, so I thought that we began to gather as a church on Sunday. For a while, they were doing both Saturday and Sunday, but through time, it just became Sunday after the temple was gone and they were all thrown out. They see that as authored by
Jesus.
Jesus?
The reason is because, principally, given in ancient writings, is Jesus rose from the dead on Sunday. Easter is the reason why our Sabbath is Sunday. But the best example of a high priest changing the law is if you read Sermon on the Mount, like Matthew's Gospel. You have heard it said, thou shalt not kill. I say to you, if you have anger in your heart toward a brother, you've already broken that law. He's changing the law. In that case, not completely throwing it out, but he's modifying the law. He's taking the Ten Commandments, which up till then were interpreted externally. Like, I was rewatching a part of a video on the virtues by Dr. Shree, and he said, what would you say if someone asked you, hey, how's your marriage these days? And you say, great, I haven't murdered her yet. There's got to be more than that. I mean, that's your definition of a marriage is you didn't kill each other, you tolerated each other. That's just a silly example of kind of how Jewish thinking, not to mock Judaism, but the ancient Jewish tendency was to think in very external ways. I'm justified because as far as I know, I've never murdered anybody. I never stole anything. And so before God, I'm holy, I'm perfect, I'm justified. Jesus raised the bar way above that and said, I say, if you have, angry thoughts in your mind, if you have internal things, you basically brought in the interior life and said, you're breaking the law in seed form. And if you keep doing it, eventually you will kill someone, you'll act on it, but you're already doing something sinful. And he gave multiple examples. He said, the law says, thou shalt not commit adultery. I say, if you look on something with lust in your heart, you're guilty already. So those are examples of modifying law. Keeping the Ten Commandments is an example of him as high priest maintaining a tradition, the core piece, and sometimes entirely doing away with something like he did away with kosher diet, he did away with Saturday and Sabbath. The one little element we keep from Judaism, I've said in the past, is the Jewish way of timekeeping is the next day begins the moment you can identify 3 stars in the night sky. This is how they determine when the Jewish Sabbath began on Friday night. We still technically do that because when does Sunday begin? Saturday night. Those who want to go to the vigil mass. We're not saying you went to mass on Saturday. We're saying you kept the Sabbath. You got first in line to the first Sabbath service. Does that make sense? So all three of those scenarios can happen. And he changed the liturgy. He gave us the mass. He said, do this in remembrance of me. I'm giving you a new ritual. And ultimately it's developed into a new liturgical calendar and new practices of 7 sacraments and all those kinds of things. Any others? Okay. So it's going to be some challenging things in here, but let's just, okay.
Was there any definition of the grouping of the people who were Judaizers? Were they Pharisees? Were they commoners?
That's a good question. I'm not sure we entirely know, but my best guess is that they're clergy of a kind. If I had to say, if I'm a detective, I'm going to say my number one suspect would be the Pharisees. Because they're traveling rabbis of a kind. They seem to fit that bill, but they're very legalistic. They don't want to give up these legalisms. And by the way, we're reading Galatians now daily. It's been pointed out by several of you. And it's really hard. I don't really want to preach on it because just even taking a paragraph without trying to explain the whole letter, it's pretty challenging. But when he's talking about you're free from the law, the Spirit is leading you to be free of that. It's important at times that I bring up apologetics because some Christians use this letter to apply against the Catholic Church and say, look at you Catholics, you made a bunch of rituals. Jesus said don't do that. St. Paul said don't do that. And you're doing it. You're remaking a problem. A man-made invention. I've heard it pointed out. It's been pointed out to me directly. You have to understand, you can't twist the letter to say something it's not intended to say. This is written to address transition from Judaism to Christianity, not to differentiate different flavors of Christianity in our modern age. So, in fairness to the letter, we can't stretch it so far that it's saying something the original author was not intending to say. So when we read it as Catholics, when we hear the law, what we're hearing is Jewish ritual. For instance, if you read a good accompanying text would be to read the letter to the Hebrews, because it says, for instance, all this animal sacrifice stuff? What was the point of all that? There's no way, the author of Hebrews basically says, to consider, who did you offend? You offended God. St. Thomas Aquinas will say in the Middle Ages, one way of measuring the seriousness of your offense is not just the action you committed, but who did you offend? If you've offended God, the most perfect person who never sinned, who is love itself, that's the worst possible person to offend. So how can killing a goat fix that? And the answer is, it can't. And the author further went on to say, look at the priest who's offering the sacrifice. That's a sinner, and they're going to die. It seems like we just have to keep repeating this, and it doesn't ever solve the problem. It doesn't justify it. And really, the Hebrews' conclusion is, if I'm giving it a fair interpretation, it never was meant to solve it. It was meant to teach us the futility of the fact that we can't fix it ourselves. We need a Savior. We're always going to keep tripping and stumbling. This is not going to fix it. So, enter Jesus Christ, the perfect high priest, who, though he died, rose again, and he's immortal. He will never die. So, his sacrifice is established forever, and he was like us in all ways but sin. So he's not a sinner. He's a perfect high priest, and he's not a goat. He's the Lamb of God, the perfect sacrifice also. And so the way I like to say it is, God solved this conundrum by God sacrificing God to God. It's the only way it can be fixed. But I mention this because basically he pointed out that this animal sacrifice stuff, it was meant to sting our conscience, to constantly remind us that we're sinning, we're breaking God's law, but also to teach us we can't save ourselves. We can't build a tower of Babel to heaven and save ourselves. We need God to come down and help us. And ultimately that's what he did. So, okay?
of these people, the Judaizers, doing it for power and money and
Maybe there's probably some political motivations among some. But I think, just in general, observing humans, change is hard for people. So some of it is just that. You're telling me this ritual I've tried to follow my whole life is no longer applicable, and I can just throw it out. I'm not okay with that. Even if you recall Peter, when God tells him you can eat any food, he said, ugh, I've never broken kosher law in my life, even as a child. You know, if I can do this. It's not easy. I've thought to myself, I've tried to imagine before, if I was back then, could I make the leap? I don't think I could have necessarily. So I like how Acts 29 said, if you were born for this time, thanks be to God. Because 2,000 years ago, I think I would have failed that. Even though I'm failing now, it would have been worse back then. So he picked the right people for each generation to sort this stuff out. We are given certain advantages, and in other things we have a harder time with the different temptations we're facing. Okay, so with that, let's start in. We'll at least get to chapter 1, huh? Oh, an apostle, not from men, not through men, but through Jesus Christ and God the Father, who raised him from the dead. This is a point he will make over and over and over again. Sunday, when I was quoting from 2 Corinthians, is especially a good example if you're interested in this point. People, it seems, if you read between the lines, constantly were challenging him, saying, you call yourself an apostle, you're not an apostle, you weren't one of the 12, I remember you in Jesus' public ministry. That's a fake title, you didn't earn that. And he said, I am an apostle. Why? Because their understanding of apostle is one, it literally means one sent. But sent by who? Sent by Jesus Christ. He said, I was sent by Jesus Christ on the road to Damascus. I met the risen Lord. He gave me my mission. I didn't get it from Peter. I didn't get it from James. I didn't get it from any of the 12. They didn't teach me theology. I received the revelation directly from Jesus in a supernatural way. So I am an apostle, darn it. And it says, to all the brethren who are with me, to the churches of Galatia, grace to you and peace from God the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who gave himself for our sins to deliver us from the present evil age, according to the will of our God and Father, to whom be the glory forever and ever. Amen. That's the end of the politeness. That's like the little polite formula to open up, make sure I give glory to God, and now I'm going to let it rip. So from verse 6 on, he's on the attack. I am astonished that you are so quickly deserting him who called you in the grace of Christ and turning to a different gospel. Not that there is another gospel, but there are some who trouble you and want to pervert the gospel of Christ. And here's an interesting line in apologetics. But even if we, or an angel from heaven, should preach to you the gospel contrary to that which we preach to you, let him be accursed. As we have said before, so now I say it again, if anyone is preaching to you a gospel contrary to that which you receive, let it be accursed. Twice. Two things about it. So, the line where it says, even if an angel should come down and give you another gospel, in our catechism, I believe it refers to this line when we speak of Mormonism, because the angel Moroni, as they claim, presented the Book of Mormon to the early followers. We say, the gospel was established by Jesus Christ in the apostolic age. You can't add to it or subtract from it or say, guys, we're going to find a fifth gospel sometime in the next century, or we'll discover there's actually a quadrinity, there's a fourth person of God, we call that apostolic tradition. It's been established. We can come to a deeper understanding of the teachings Jesus gave us through prayer and discernment, but we can't change or significantly add to what he's given us, subtract from or add to. but he says it twice would be a curse. That, in modern day writing, that would be like putting like 3 exclamation points at the end of your sentence. They didn't have a way of using superlative form and comparative form in their language, so by repeating a thing, it was a way of saying, at an emphasis, cursed be you. Which is a heavy thing to say. That's like, go to hell. You don't mess with what God has given us. This is sacred stuff. So it starts very strongly. And then he says, am I now seeking the favor of men or of God? Or am I trying to please men? If I were still pleasing men, I should not be a servant of Christ. So he's basically saying there, I don't care if you like what I'm about to say. I'm not trying to win a popularity contest. And if I were guilty of that, I would be a politician, not a missionary. So I don't care how you react to what I'm going to say. I'm telling you this because it's the truth, whether you like it or not, however you react. So this is really, just think a young 30-something-year-old St. Paul just letting the punches fly. So he says in verse 11, brethren, I would have you know that the gospel which was preached by me is not man's gospel, for I did not receive it from man, nor was I taught it, but it came through a revelation of Jesus Christ. Some of you I know some of you commented, but when we were going through Acts of the Apostles, I was throwing in added details of the life of St. Paul that weren't in Acts of the Apostles, and some people were asking me, where are you getting this from? I was getting it from the letters of St. Paul. So you read all the letters of St. Paul and get the little details and add it back to Acts of the Apostles. You can get a full picture, but he says it in his own words. I didn't have a human teacher. The 12 didn't teach me this. Barnabas didn't teach me this. The community in Antioch didn't teach me this. It was kind of directly received into my heart and mind from Jesus Christ. For you have heard of my former life in Judaism, how I persecuted the church of God violently and tried to destroy it. And I advanced in Judaism beyond many of my own age among my people. In other places, he says this stronger, but he basically said, I was a child prodigy. I was a genius. I was the leading scholar of my generation. So extremely zealous was I for the tradition of my fathers. But when he who had set me apart before I was born and had called me through his grace was pleased to reveal his Son to me in order that I might preach him among the Gentiles, I did not confer with flesh and blood, nor did I go up to Jerusalem to those who were apostles before me. But I went away into Arabia, and again I returned to Damascus. Then after 3 years, I went up to Jerusalem to visit Cephas. Cephas is the original name of Peter. He's talking about using his old, well, that's not actually. Simon is the original name. Cephas would be the name for rock, Peter. So that's the original name Jesus gave him. But he's saying his time away was 3+ years. In the desert of Arabia, our tradition says he lived as a hermit. So there are bits he left out there, which we know from Acts. He caused a riot in Damascus. He had to flee for his life. He caused a riot in Jerusalem. He had to flee for his life. Then he went to Tarsus, his hometown, to cool his jets. And that's when he entered the desert of Arabia. He decided, I'm going to go through this spiritual time in the nest and further pray on his understanding of what Jesus revealed to him. It's just him and God, him and the Holy Spirit kind of pondering through these things. And it is said, the reason it's essentially 3.5 years is because that's how long the 12 were with Jesus in his public ministry, 3.5 years. And as an apostle, he needed to put in his time of formation also. So he did put in that time in a kind of extreme way. And he says only after that, after this about 3.5 years, he finally presents his theology to Peter, just to make sure he's not running in vain, to make sure he's not going to cause damage. That's a good sign of wisdom, that even though I feel pretty certain, I feel God gave this to me, I'm going to be humble enough to get a spiritual director and make sure that this is accurate. I want to be a man of the church. That's to me an indication I recognize myself as part of a community. I'm not the Lone Ranger. I want to make sure I'm building up the body of Christ and not doing damage. So he checks with the authority, which for us, we view him as the first pope. He goes to see the pope and says, tell me if I'm right or wrong. Is this accurate? And it says he remained with him 15 days. So it's just about a 2-week visit, but he's using that time to check his theology with Peter, make sure it's right. And he says, but I saw none of the other apostles except James, the Lord's brother. Why? By the way, we know from Acts of the Apostles, the others are not there anymore. They've gone out to every point in the compass. Why is James there? Because I've told you, we consider James the second bishop of Jerusalem after Peter. He's the one permanently living there. He must have timed his visit when Peter was in town. Peter, at this time, was living in Antioch, and for whatever reason, at the time Paul comes, Peter and James are there in Jerusalem. So that's the only two apostles he had conversation with, and he only talked theology with Peter. He wants to make that clear. In what I am writing to you before God, I do not lie. So add emphasis. Then I went into the region of Syria and Cilicia, and I was still not known by sight to the churches of Christ in Judea. They only heard it said, he who once persecuted us is now preaching the faith he once tried to destroy. And they glorified God because of it. So he went far enough away, Syria and Cilicia, where they didn't know him by sight. They only knew him by reputation. But his reputation had spread that far. And when people, if you recall in his travels, when people heard his name, they were afraid of him, deathly afraid at first, until they heard his preaching and were convinced he had made an authentic change in his life. It's not only until he gets to Greece, to Athens, where people haven't even heard of him by reputation. They're like, who's this crazy nutter from the country who's talking about rising from the dead? The people in the Middle East and the area of Turkey, they knew of him. Going to stop there. That's just a little bio, and then we'll pick up on chapter 2. But we're going to go really deep. So I want to encourage you. I don't know that too many people have taken me up on this, but I keep throwing it out there in hopes that some will do this. Just keep a little reading journal. When you come up across an intriguing line or something that sounds crazy, or a term that's confusing to you, whatever, just write it down so that we remember questions when we gather next time. Okay? We'll pick up. We'll get more through than chapter 2 next time, I promise you, because we had to cover the base background today, but we'll at least get a couple chapters each time we gather, but we'll just take it according to your questions. So let's just close with prayer. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and shall be, world without end. Amen. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Please, just as a side note, please keep our building project in your prayer as you drive by it each week, especially if you're not from Sacred Heart as a parishioner, or you're not able to get out here regularly. You can see construction going on there. There's a lot of things happening below ground with plumbing and gas lines and electrical and all that, because we're moving from 2 small houses to a bigger facility. But they're prepping the ground now for pouring the foundation, and eventually we're going to start seeing concrete trucks pull in. And I've seen videos of Outlier, how fast they lay out the foundation of large warehouses and stuff. They don't go fast once it happens, but I know they want to get the concrete poured before it turns cold and wet. So anyway, progress each week. But I want to build this house with prayer, so please throw your prayers into the mix. And next year, at this time, I'll be teaching over